Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a Ukraine War Update news segment for the 13th of March 2023. Let's get straight to where we normally start, which are the Ukrainian release figures for the Russian losses for the day before. As ever, all my caveats, just in case I get suspended by YouTube again. So take these with a pinch of salt. They may be inaccurate. These could be propaganda. Russia don't produce the same kind of daily figures. However, I personally find these indicative and useful and pretty much accurate as far as I can work out, certainly over recent times. It's more difficult to calculate liquidated personnel. And indeed to know exactly what is meant by that term. But anyway, 710 liquidated personnel yesterday. That's a downtick from previous days. This we don't always see this on a Monday as a result of being the day before being Sunday, but very often we do see the figures drop on a Sunday. I don't think we did last week. But anyway, 710, which is still above average for the war, quite considerably, and still a bad day for the Russians. Just, some 300 fewer liquidated personnel than on previous days. 8 tanks, 5 APCs, 16 artillery systems. That is a large number of artillery systems taken out. Someone was saying in the threads yesterday that there's a large number of Russian artillery systems being repaired. And indeed, it looks like not only do they have a lack of ammunition for these pieces of artillery, but they arguably don't have the artillery pieces that certainly they had during the peak of the war, as in the peak of the Russian artillery usage. I would like to see the data for that, but it wouldn't surprise me because we know that Ukraine are consistently having to replace barrels and repair pieces of artillery by sending them back to Poland or Germany. And indeed, as according to Michael Kaufman, there are now that Ukraine now has indigenous capability for repairing howitzers in Ukraine, so they don't have to send them abroad and increase the logistics chain. Anyway, 1 drone, 6 vehicles, 9 pieces of special equipment. That is the highest piece of special equipment I have seen. And I don't know whether that has something to do with artillery systems, whether you're seeing radar systems being hit. And I don't know whether this is a case of shaping certain areas ready for counteroffensive. However, I don't think you'll see a Ukrainian counteroffensive till well into the summer. I've been thinking about this a bit, and Andrew Perpetua made some comments on this yesterday. If you look at how much training is going on and how much equipment there is being given to Ukraine, but also the notion that equipment's not going to be turning up, anytime soon, as in they'll get dribs and drabs of it taking place over the next few months or 6 months or even year. And I think that it's in Ukraine's best interest to wait till they've got the greatest amount of equipment, the optimal amount of equipment, and training. And I don't think it will be worth them doing a counterattack until the ground is properly solid and they have all that stuff and trained personnel. So you might not see a Ukrainian counteroffensive until midsummer plus. Anyway, let's go and have a quick look at Bakhmut in terms of figures. The Bakhmut holds, but the commander of Ukraine's ground forces, Alexander Syrskyi, this morning admits the situation is difficult. So Bakhmut is difficult. Russia tries to advance in the center and surround the town, but they are suffering heavy losses, he says. So little change, but the pressure is mounting. Let's have a little look at these losses. So last post in the thread says Phillips O'Brien. Zelensky really doubling down on the effectiveness of his Bakhmut strategy, claims more than 1,100 Russians were killed there in a week. And the Washington Post picks up on this. In his nightly address, Zelensky said that Ukraine killed more than 1,100 Russian fighters in Bakhmut in the past week, while another 1,500 were out of action because of the severity of their injuries. If you look at that figure, that is a 1 to 1.4. I mean, that is a really, if this is true, that is a terrible stat for the Russians, not just in terms of the sheer numbers of those lost. So 2,600 out of action in Bakhmut in the last week alone, Russians, but the fact that there are so many dead to wounded, that's the highest, or you could say, sorry, the lowest ratio of dead to wounded that I've seen, and that is really problematic for the Russians. But is that accurate? Is this Zelensky, essentially giving out propaganda to justify staying there. Well, I don't see that Ukraine would stay there if they didn't have these figures. If they didn't believe these figures, they wouldn't stay there, because they're just like sacrificing their troops for a political uh, reason rather than a military reason. And I don't think, I know the Russians will say that about Zelensky, but he won't do that. Like, they need to win this war. And I just think that they have that calculation. As long as that calculation is in their favors, yes, it's attriting Ukrainian forces, but if it is attriting Russian forces at their desired ratio to Ukrainian forces, they will continue to do that, because they need to fix the Russians in there so that they can get their counteroffensive sorted. If the Russians take Bakhmut, then they could move on and start knocking on other places, and you just get the same position in another place. So you might as well have it in Bakhmut. Anyway, Russian equipment and ammunition depots were also destroyed. He said the Washington Post could not independently verify his claims. Analysts have said the months of bloody fighting in Bakhmut have been costly for both sides. Kiev Independent says, and this is going back to Surisky, in fierce battles, he says, our defenders inflict significant losses on the enemy. All enemy attempts to capture the city are repelled by artillery, tanks, and other firepower. And that is quoted by the Ukrainian Defense Ministry's media center. He added that Ukraine's armed forces continued the defense of the fortress, as the Ukrainian authorities often call the embattled eastern city of Bakhmut, which has been Russia's main target for over 7 months. There's this big, conversation about whether Bakhmut is the right thing to do or not. Here we have New World Economics War Report saying 10 brigades. There is a claimed accumulation of Ukrainian forces in Chaziv Yar, which is just to the west of Bakhmut. Bakhmut is here on the eastern front in Donetsk, and just to the west is Chaziv Yar, and you have Konstantinivka, Druzhkivka, Kramatorsk, and Slavyansk that are often, they get hit pretty much consistently with artillery and other and rockets and whatnot. So War Monitor says notable Russian sources, so these are from Russian sources, including those close to Wagner, report that the armed forces of Ukraine have a large strike group made up of 10 brigades currently in Chaziv Yar preparing to conduct a wide counterattack in the Bakhmut direction. They claim that Ukraine will probably be using new Leopard tanks and strike drones during this attack. I doubt they'll be using new Leopard tanks in there. I severely doubt it. Is that true? I don't know. What is going on there? Are the Ukrainians going to conduct a counterattack? I don't know. It might be sensible for them while they've got a load of Russian troops wrapped up there. Could they do some kind of encirclement themselves where they, take out the north of Bakhmut or some other such decision? I don't know. You can see a rationale to that. We have Andrew Perpetua is quite damning as a pro-Ukrainian of the Ukrainian stance, and he's done a lot of map work on Bakhmut. So we'll do that in my map update later. But he says, generally speaking, the situation around Bakhmut is terrible and deteriorating. Losing the city is disappointing, especially given the resources available for its defense, but it isn't the end of the world. However, Ukraine's constant desire to throw more men at the problem has a real chance of backfiring. It is long past time for Ukraine to cut its losses and pull back to a different defensive line. As fighting intensifies, opportunities to pull out become fewer and increasingly dangerous, especially when combined with bad weather and deteriorating roads. There will be a point, and we could already be there, where withdrawal is no longer a reasonable option and fighting will continue, waiting for a lull in combat. It will take months for Ukraine to prepare a significant counterattack. I don't know whether it means counteroffensive rather than counterattack. Counterattack means a localized counter in Bakhmut. Counteroffensive is somewhere else, a much larger widespread attack on whole regions, maybe Zaporizhia, maybe up in Svatov direction. It requires substantial training, planning, and preparation. I don't think Bakhmut can last months. Furthermore, preparing for the counter-attack offensive itself requires a lull in combat, a period where Russia is forced, for whatever reason, to slow its pace of assaults. A break in intensity will allow Ukraine to train its forces and prepare for its attack. Thing is, I think if Russia stopped there at Bakhmut, if Russia take Bakhmut, I don't think they would stop there. They will need to culminate for a little bit and reconstitute for a bit, but I think they will be so up for continuing that momentum that they will advance forward. But but I don't know. They should really stop and reconstitute. The break in intensity will allow Ukraine to train its forces and prepare for its attack. We witnessed this last summer leading up to Ukraine's major offensives in the autumn. Russia will likely continue its current pressure level for the next 2 to 3 months, at which point Ukraine could begin preparing for its attack, which could come in 5 to 7 months, late summer to autumn, in other words. Can the defense of Bakhmut last that long? I strongly doubt it. It is possible, but I doubt it. And even if Ukraine can defend that long, at what cost? Would it even be worth it? And these are the questions, is it worth it for the Ukrainians to continue doing this? And the counter narrative is that actually Wagner and Russia are in a worse state than you might think. So this is the UK intelligence update. Tim White says, amid reports that a number of Wagner fighters in Ukraine has dwindled from 45,000 to 7,500. This is unconfirmed. Today's British update concentrates on the problems for the mercenaries and its leader Prigozhin. In recent weeks, it says, Wagner Group owner Prigozhin has likely lost access to recruiting in Russian prisons due to ongoing disputes with the Russian MOD leadership. Prigozhin is highly likely pivoting recruitment efforts towards free Russian citizens. We've heard recently that he's opened 40... Oh, here it goes. Since the start of March 2023, Wagner has set up outreach teams based in sports centers in at least 40 locations across Russia. In recent days, masked Wagner recruiters also gave career talks in Moscow high schools, under mask though. Hey, you should come and join Wagner, they say to these 17-year-olds and whatnot. It's so great that I'm not even going to let you know who I am, and I will be doing this from behind the mask. Masked Wagner recruiters also gave career talks in Moscow high schools, distributing questionnaires entitled Application of a Young Warrior to collect the contact details of interested pupils. After about half of the prisoners Wagner has already deployed in Ukraine have likely become casualties, and the new initiatives are unlikely to make up for the loss of the convict recruit pipeline. If the ban endures, Prigozhin will likely be forced to reduce the scale or intensity of Wagner operations in Ukraine. And indeed, here we now hear that the Russian resort to unconventional means to make up for heavy losses. Last week, a train with prisoners moved to the Donetsk battlefront. One of the carriages held condemned women. So this is this is a general stuff. Of course, this is the information space. Can we trust these claims? Can we trust the Russian claims? Like, trying to work out whether holding on to Bakhmut is a good idea or not depends entirely on the evaluation of the losses for both sides. And can we trust the figures? I mean, if you're pro-Ukrainian, you kind of have to say, well, if what the Ukrainian general staff are saying is correct, then that calculation is correct, and in which case it is worth the Ukrainians holding Bakhmut and treating the Russians at levels. But if the Russians are saying that Ukrainians are losing this money, then is it the calculations are only as good as the numbers you shove in. So garbage in, garbage out, GIGO, like garbage in, garbage out. But so it becomes this whole conversation just comes down to whether you trust the Ukrainian figures or not, or at least are they largely accurate? Are Ukraine attriting Russian forces and fixing them and making a calculation that they are losing fewer troops than the Russians, right, to a significant degree? Or the other option is they are not losing fewer troops than the Russians to significant degrees, and therefore they are sacrificing a bunch of their own troops for political gains. What is the most likely theory of what the Ukrainians are doing here, given that those seem to be the two competing theories? And then it's piecing together the jigsaw, looking at these other things. Right, the claims that Wagner have been pretty much decimated in the area. Yes, they're still going, but they have lost. You're starting to see VDV and regular troops and DPR very active in the Bakhmut area. Does that support the idea that Bakhmut have lost a lot? We're also hearing that Bakhmut are fairly capable in the area as well, from people like Michael Kaufman. They do have these human waste, but they also have decent strike assault groups as well. So I don't know. I don't know. I feel personally that it is in the best interest of Ukraine to. I reckon it's getting closer to the cusp, but I don't think they would be holding on for merely political gains in Bakhmut, as many people think. I just don't think they would do that. But I could be wrong. At least 2 explosions. So moving off from Bakhmut, at least 2 explosions loud enough to set off car alarms have been heard near the city of Mariupol within the last hour. This is last night. Explosions. Sorry. A few minutes before the explosions, a video was filmed that shows some kind of projectile flying south near Vuhledar towards the city. And just to remind you that this is down here on the coast of the Azov Sea. You got Mariupol, Berdyansk, and Melitopol are quite often being hit at the moment. Moving on, videos from Belgorod region, so that is north near Kharkiv. So that is up in this area up here. So that had quite a lot of air activity last night. Within the last few minutes, so this was last night, reportedly showing Russian air defense engaging supposed missiles over the city. Explosions are said to have been heard, but it is unclear if these were from successful strikes or interceptions. Belgorod is obviously being targeted. On the other side of the coin, Russian forces are shelling Kutsurub, the district of Mykolaiv Oblast, southern Ukraine. So just to let you know where Mykolaiv is, that is there to the west, northwest of Kherson, and that has been traditionally hit quite a lot over the course of the war. Slightly quieter recently compared to previous months, but still getting hit with shelling. So one would assume that's probably coming from the Kimburn Peninsula here. I don't know that they could reach Mykolaiv otherwise. I might have to look at that on my map to get a distance calculation. Konstantinivka is getting hit. So an attack on Konstantinivka a day earlier injured 8 people and destroyed and damaged more than a dozen houses. The barrages have overwhelmed local firefighters who take great risks putting out fires in buildings and cars, even as the shelling continues. So there is Konstantinivka has been taking quite a hammering. So just to remind you, Konstantinivka is to the west of Bakhmut and is a kind of staging point, I think, for forces as well as Chasiv Yar for the Bakhmut area. That is consistently hit by Russians and has been for some time, including with the S-300s. So here it looks like the impact crater of a Russian missile at a farm in southeastern rural Kharkiv. You can see that this is pretty much devastated. Look at that crater. That is significant. Again, that's a big missile that's done that. Is that an S-300 surface-to-air missile using its ground-to-ground capability? Is it a bigger missile than that? What's it doing hitting a farm in the middle of the Kharkiv district where there's nothing around? Obviously, that's deeply, deeply inaccurate and shows you that they're just not using the right weapons. Well, at least that would be the assumption, all other things remaining equal. The probability of a new Russian missile attack. So there are some claims, there's some air raid sirens today. There's some claims that it could be another attack today. But the weather is so bad, apparently in the Black Sea, that they wouldn't be able to launch cruise missiles from there. And in fact, a lot of the launch vehicles have returned to their bases because it's just too stormy. So even if that was planned for today, it's unlikely to happen. And Russia on fire. Another Moscow warehouse went up in flames, this time in Odintsovo, Moscow region. About 4,300 square meters burned down. I was doing my maths homework revision with one of my twins yesterday. They got exams, and goodness me, it annoys me when you watch a video of actual maths teachers using square centimeters instead of centimeters squared. There is a difference. Come on, know your maths. Anyway, that's random. Talking about Wagner, Tim White says here, another slight problem for Wagner appears to be a data hack or leak showing huge amounts of personal information. I don't want to be accused of doxing even this lot, but it's likely a leak from within Russia, and that has happened. So maybe more information will come out on that soon. But we have seen some kind of pro-Ukrainian hacking of Russians over the course of the war. I was expecting that to be maybe a little bit more prevalent, but we shall see. It'll be interesting to see what the outcome of that is. Okay, talking about military aid and whatnot, not too much to report, because obviously it's a weekend, Monday. Usually these things take place, get announced during the week. Switzerland will destroy decommissioned Rapier air defense systems, says Michael McKay. Instead of transferring them to Ukraine, the Swiss government aggressively supports the Russian fascist invaders. I mean, there's a lot of emotive rhetoric here, and has made the decision so that more Ukrainians will die. I don't think they made that decision so that Ukrainians will die. They are just staunchly behind their neutrality. But obviously, Michael McKay is not a fan of that. The Swiss seem to be very much, I don't know, doubling down is probably a bit too emotive. They are just staunch defenders of their neutrality and how they interpret it in terms of arms export. I don't see, there was something that the Berset said the other day that, again, I've told you many times that I don't think that they can have neutrality and an arms export industry. I think they announced that their weapons should not be used in war. Well, why are you producing the weapons? They are literally designed to be used in war. So, and there's this really weird line of like trying to have a profit making arms export industry, but also saying we will not, you know, we will remain neutral. I don't get it. I still don't get it. Anyway, Leopard 2A6 training in Germany is almost complete. I don't get it because it's also not a very good business model. Like, you're not going to have people buying off you if they can't re-export it and use it how they would want. And you'll lose out to arms manufacturers who will allow that. Just that's how it happened. Leopard 2A6 training in Germany is almost complete. By the end of March, tanks and trained personnel will go to Ukraine. So this, I've been reporting this every day, but there's lots of training going on. They are going to need thousands of tankers trained on a whole suite of different things, from all the T-72 upgrades. Okay, they can indigenously train them, and they've got a lot of expertise on T-72s. But if you're getting a whole bunch more, you're going to need tankers trained up on them, tankers trained up on Challenger 2, Leopard 2, the AMX pieces coming in, Leopard 1, all these different pieces of equipment, Abrams, of course. So many, just hundreds and hundreds, thousands of tankers need to be trained. Iran has showed its Shahed 191 kamikaze UAV with a new mobile launch system. It has a range of 1,500 kilometers and can carry 2 bombs with a maximum load of 100 kilograms, can fly for 4.5 hours at a maximum altitude of 7.5 kilometers and reach speeds of up to 350 kilometers per hour. This is, Iran are becoming, well, they are a bit of a problem for Ukraine, aren't they? And you would imagine they would end up in Russian hands. Okay, bit of geopolitics. Let's go to Georgia. So the pro-Russian former Georgian president, Mikhail Saakashvili, is close to death after an alleged prison poisoning. He's in prison. He was twice the president of Georgia. Too much to talk about him here in great detail. He was then in Ukraine. I think he became the governor of Odessa. I think New World Economics War Updates was talking about him, but I think didn't quite do enough research on him to understand why. It was like laughing at him for being a Ukrainian politician as well as a Georgian politician, but he had to give up his Georgian citizenship because they were trying to get him and all this kind of stuff, and then became Ukrainian citizen, then had that taken away, I think, by Poroshenko, and then it was given back by Zelensky. And anyway, he went back to Georgia in 2021, even though he was up for being imprisoned for supposedly embezzlement and all sorts. But the EU and US had said they weren't too keen on the legal proceedings against him, so it's difficult to know what was going on. It probably was involved in corruption, but he did loads of reforms as well in Georgia. I mean, he's got a really long sort of political history because he took over, I think, presidency at 36, the age of 36, very young, but he's had assassination attempts against him. Anyway, he's in prison, and it looks like he's been poisoned. Sort of Navalny-esque type thing going on there. Sorry, going the wrong way there. So he has been speaking to Sky News through written answers through his lawyers, but he's saying things like stay very vigilant, be ready to mobilize at short notice because of the vengeful mood of the oligarchs regime. He's talking about like Georgian Dream. Some people like NWE War Update say that these are pro West, pro EU party. Well, technically they are, but essentially they're not, and they have changed tack to a more pro-Russian position, trying to change the rule that a foreign agent rule that they try to bring in that brought back these protests was, I think, pretty much the same rule that Russia brought in. That has helped them get towards an autocratic position they're presently in. So this is a quite a tried and tested ruling, and that's why the Georgians were so against that. And this is where we're at. And anyway, you got this guy in prison who would be supporting the protesters, but it looks like he's been poisoned, and he's lost half of his body weight, and he says he's close to death, and his organs are very close to shutting down. He says French President Emmanuel Macron spoke out on his fate this week, saying former political leaders in Georgia who are being detained and in poor health should be freed or the health situation checked. European Parliament resolution in February demanded his release and pardon, and warned Georgia the issue would be seen as a litmus test for its commitment to European values. So this is super important, the fate of this guy and Georgia's future in terms of where it wants to go with the EU and the rest of the world. So something to really look out for. This guy, he's not in a good way. Okay. A French general shared his opinion about the future of Russia. French General Michel Yakovlev said that NATO needs to be prepared for the collapse of the Russian Federation. In his opinion, such a scenario is practically guaranteed and will be more bloody than the collapse of the USSR. If you see that Russia can't win here, the question is where does it go? Maybe not 1 year, maybe not 2 years, 5 years. Will Russia collapse in the same way as we saw the USSR? And what will happen if that happens? And this guy is saying NATO need to be ready for that. This, I mean, this is he thinks is a certain eventuality. It could be informed by economics. So this is an FT Financial Times article. Vladimir Putin is much more broke than we think. However, it is drawing basically essentially from what Jeffrey Sonnenfeld said, and I've showed you that video. So if you agree with Sonnenfeld, then you'll agree with this article. If you disagree with Sonnenfeld, you will just dismiss this. But the article says, if you torture statistics long enough, eventually they'll confess. On that timeless maxim, Vladimir Putin managed to conjure out a minor 2.1% contraction in Russia's economy last year against the double digits that we were expecting. The bizarre thing is that we believed him. The IMF and World Bank dutifully recycled Moscow's official 2022 growth numbers, prompting soul searching about Russia's resilience. But it's basically, don't believe what the Russians say. And he goes on to sort of talk about Sonnenfeld's points. 3 million of Russia's most educated people have left the country, taking with them their intellectual capital and energy. Back home, the Russian state is cannibalizing refrigerators and other white goods for the chips it can no longer import, according to Sonnenfeld's monitoring team at Yale. 1,000 of 1,200 top foreign corporate investors in Russia have now fully pulled out of the country. Their revenues accounted for 35% of Russia's GDP before the invasion of Ukraine. Among these were the oil and gas companies such as BP. It took a write-down of $25.5 billion and kept Russia's fuel pipelines flowing and its equipment maintained. And the key is apparently it's the maintenance that's lacking of some of the infrastructure of Russia's fossil fuel production. Russia's natural gas exports have all but dried up. Europe used to take the bulk of Russia's supply and has now reduced it to close to zero. I have no idea who blew up Nord Stream 2, but it was quite unnecessary. Europe has shown Chinese-style efficiency in rapidly building LNG capacity to import the liquefied gas that Russia is technically incapable of producing. Russia's vapor gas is thus stuck with no market. It would take years to build Russian pipelines to alternative buyers. To be sure, China, India, and others are taking that Russian oil, and Europe no longer imports, but Russia is selling it at a loss. Deutsche Bank estimates that Russia is earning barely a third of its pre-war fossil fuel revenues. It's also becoming increasingly expensive, roughly twice the global average, for Russia to extract it. It costs Russia $45 to extract a barrel of oil and another $12 to get it to its customers. This suits the West perfectly, since we don't want the global oil price to go up and don't want Russia to make money. Since more than half of Russia's budget comes from fossil fuel revenues, the government is now pillaging its rainy day funds. More extreme revenue extraction measures will surely follow, so on and so forth. And then you put that together with India. I mean, this is huge, right? And I'm going to leave you with this. India has agreed to comply with sanctions on imports of goods to the Russian Federation. or from the Russian Federation, as well as not to buy Russian oil at a price higher than a price ceiling. Bloomberg reports. So Bloomberg has reported that India, and remember, India are part of the BRICS group, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South of Africa. So India should be matey with China, but they are now going to ensure that no breach on Russian oil purchase sanctions will take place. And India's oil purchases from Russia will be below the price cap, well below the price cap. Wow. So that's the EU-US price cap. India told banks traders to stick to price cap terms. Now, you can bet your bottom dollar that the US and Europe would have been pressuring India and saying, if you don't do this, we won't be doing X, Y, and Z. So I can imagine that's going to be the case. But this also works massively in India's favor, right? So India are going to go to Russia and say, we've got to keep to the sanctions. I'm sorry. We will only buy your oil at this price. Now, we are a huge country of 1 billion people. We are one of the only people that are going to continue buying the oil at this kind of rate, right? And we've upped up to maybe the amount of oil that you are wanting to sell to us. So if we now have a really great excuse to buy this at a much lower level, we are in a much better position because we are now buying oil, huge amount of oil, and much less than we were previously paying for it. So India are like, yeah, we are laughing here, and Russia are screwed because they this stuff has to keep flowing. I don't think they have a way of being able to shut it off particularly. This is certainly the case with gas. They're having to burn huge amounts of gas literally as it's coming out because they can't store it. No one was buying enough. People weren't buying enough of it, so they're just burning it. Well, with oil, they can, but they've got to do something with it. So they are selling it off at a loss or at far less than they would ideally like, which means their budgets are all screwed going forward. So yeah, I'm sure India are doing this for financial reasons rather than moral reasons, but nevertheless, this is really good news for Ukraine and for the war because without the money to prop up the war, Russia are in trouble, and then they'll start not putting huge amounts of money into their domestic areas, and the population of Russia will see the effects of the war, and I'm sure will start getting pretty restless. So this all helps the anti-Russia, pro-Ukraine scenario. Anyway, that's today's news. I've banged on for way too long. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate that. Lots of content to come today, as ever. Just loads to talk about. Please come along and join the ride. Take care. Speak soon.